Back to GB News Day. Let's just recap on this breaking news that we're getting from Scotland, that the official document released by the National Records there has shown that the Queen's official death certificate has revealed that the Queen died from old age and that her official time of death on Thursday, September the 8th, was at 3:10. That's just coming through.
Our royal reporter Cameron Walker is at Windsor. Cameron, can you tell us any more about what we know from the publication of the death certificate?
Yes, so it was released by the National Records of Scotland just in the last 20-25 minutes or so, and on the surface it looks like any ordinary death certificates that anybody in the British Isles would get upon their death, but of course she was an extraordinary lady, Her Majesty the Queen. As you said, she died at 3:10 in the afternoon at Balmoral Castle on the 8th of September. And I think what's truly heartbreaking is that this confirms that Prince William, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and Prince Andrew, and indeed Prince Harry, did not make it in time to Balmoral to say goodbye to Her Majesty the Queen, because according to Flight Radar 24, on the day of Her Majesty's death, their RAF plane, apart from Prince Harry, who was on a separate plane, arrived at Aberdeen Airport at 3:50 p.m. On that afternoon, which obviously means Her Majesty the Queen had been dead for 40 minutes by the time their plane landed. The Princess Royal signed the death certificate a few days following Her Majesty the Queen's death. We know the Princess Royal accompanied Her Majesty's coffin from Balmoral to Edinburgh, and then on that RAF C-17 aircraft from Edinburgh Airport down to RAF Northolt, the same plane that carried the troops who had lost their lives in Afghanistan. Quite a fitting journey for Her Majesty the Queen. So that's what we know so far from the death certificates. But I think what truly what kind of stands out for me is it does confirm that time delay for members of the royal family getting up to Scotland to say their final goodbyes.
Press Association reporting that it was Douglas James Allen Glass who was the certifying registered medical practitioner. Old age the only cause of death listed, with no other contributing factors. Now, of course, it was the case, remember, Karen. There was a lot of conjecture, of course, because the palace had been saying that she'd been suffering with these episodic problems with mobility.
Yes, they've been saying for almost a year now that the Queen was suffering with what they described as episodic mobility problems. I think to you or I, that means she had good days and bad days with her movements. But even in the weeks running up to Her Majesty's death, there was nothing to suggest that anything else was particularly wrong with her. The palace keep medical details of members of the royal family very private, understandably. They are private individuals as well as members of the royal family, but of course she was Her Majesty the Queen, and therefore there was a big public interest in the health of our sovereign who reigned over us for 70 years. But just two words, as you said, Mark, on the death certificate. It just said old age, which can mean perhaps anything to a lot of people, but I think perhaps we're not going to get any more details as to exactly what Her Majesty the Queen died of. I think we have to accept that that is the information we're going to get.
Indeed.
And Cameron, you're outside Windsor Castle because hundreds of people have been queuing to see the final resting place of Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes, Windsor Castle opened its gates at 10 o'clock this morning, the first time it has opened to the public since the death of Her Majesty the Queen. Even before the gates opened, there were hundreds of people queuing to get into the Windsor Castle compound to see St George's Chapel, which houses the annex of King George VI Memorial Chapel, where Her Majesty the Queen was finally interred, along with her late husband, her mother and father, and sister as well. I've been speaking to a couple of people who have been coming out of the complex here at Windsor Castle, and they were visibly moved and said it was an incredible experience to see Her Majesty the Queen's final resting place, a new black ledger stone inscribing the names of her husband, and King George VI and the Queen Mother there, as well as the Garter Star. Of course, all four of them were members of the most noble order of the Garter, the oldest and most noble order of chivalry in Britain, and St George's Chapel behind me is the spiritual home of that order, people were told to were queuing for St George's Chapel, and similar to lying in state, actually, they're only allowed to spend a short amount of time physically looking into the very small King George VI Memorial Chapel because there were so many people they were trying to get through. And tickets are time allocated, of course, so there were 10 o'clock slots, 10:30, 11 and so on. But there were a lot of people to get through. But I think overall the atmosphere here has been very much one of paying tribute and paying respects to Her Majesty the Queen and seeing her final resting place for the first time.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, Cameron, that when we see those pictures of that ledger stone, it's a very intimate setting, isn't it? We saw, of course, the service and the interment and the huge sort of majesty, if you like, of the chapel itself. But then you've got this sort of ante-room, and clearly people are seeing a very personal part of the monarch's life there.
Yes, personal is a great way to describe it. It's a tiny little chapel. I've been there myself, not since Her Majesty had passed away, but it really is small and intimate. You can really picture members of the royal family going there to pay their private respects to members of their own family. And then, of course, it is a very small annex attached to this massive St George's Chapel, which has been home to many funerals and as well as weddings, some happy times and sad times. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, of course, were married in that chapel, as well as Princess Eugenie and her husband Jack Brooksbank, who's one of Prince Andrew's daughters. So it's got a lot of history, that chapel, and this King George VI Memorial Chapel is actually a relatively new part of the chapel. It was only installed, I think, I can't remember the exact dates, but it was relatively recent compared to the ancient chapel that we see behind me. Certainly it was in the 20th century. So I think a lot of people have been passing through, foreign tourists, of course, yes, who had tickets anyway, but I think many Brits here today have come to pay their respects specifically to see Her Majesty's final resting place.